On today's episode, I'll compare Frank Nazar's new contract to those of similar young players across the NHL, and I'll also react to the NHL Network's top 20 wings list.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's poppin', Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can go and follow me on X at Jack Bushman2, but make sure to check out my strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey so you don't miss out on any of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And I also got to give a quick shout out here to today's sponsor, which is Game Time. Go and download the Game Time app, create an account, and then use our promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps for $20 off on your first purchase and to take the guesswork out of buying your tickets. All right, Blackhawks fans, on the show recently, I already broke down my reaction to Frank Nazar's new contract extension and explained why I fully believe it has the potential to turn into an absolute bargain of a deal here in the near future. And if you happen to have missed that episode, by the way, you can easily go and find it on the Locked On Blackhawks YouTube channel if you still want to check it out. Today, though, what I want to be doing next is comparing similar contracts of young forwards across the NHL to Nazar's, comparing their career production and their cap hit, which I think will explain even more why Nazar's contract holds exceptional value, even if he is still a little bit of an unproven commodity at this point in his NHL career. First, though, just to kind of set the scene on Nazar, of course, a little less than a week ago, he signed a 7-year extension here with the Blackhawks, carrying a cap hit just shy of $6.6 million, inking him to the club through the summer of 2033. However, as I just alluded to a moment ago, Nazar is still only 21 years old, not set to turn 22 until January, and he only has 56 games of NHL action under his belt. 3 games at the end of the 23-24 campaign, and then 53 games this past season up in the NHL, where we saw him tally 26 points, 12 goals and 14 assists. So not a whole lot of NHL activity for Nazar up to this point in time. However, if you've actually been watching Nazar and the impact that he provides when he's been on the NHL scene, you know why the Blackhawks feel comfortable in giving him this type of extension, despite him having only 56 NHL games of experience and being still young in his professional career as the 13th overall pick in the 2022 NHL draft. But for the kind of development and the path that Nazar's been on for the last year and a half in comparison to some other high selections in recent NHL drafts, guys who I'm about to get into here in just a second, I think he's on a very similar trajectory to a lot of these guys, and the Blackhawks definitely have a good reason to feel as confident as they do that Frank Nazar is going to be a core piece here for their franchise as these guys are for their respected clubs. The first contract that I think is very similar to Frank Nazar's, no surprise here, it was one that was signed as an RFA earlier this summer, is Matt Coronato, who signed a 7-year deal just like Nazar, carrying a cap hit of $6.5 million. This was a deal that he signed back in May, by the way, and signs him to the Calgary Flames through the summer of 2032. So 1 year earlier than Frank Nazar will his contract expire. However, Coronato is in the draft class ahead of Frank Nazar, so he's 1 year ahead of him in terms of his development and his career path up to this point in time. And what's interesting is Matt Coronato was also the 13th pick in the NHL draft the year prior to Nazar in 2021, and he had 47 points, 24 goals, 23 assists, and 77 games for the Flames this past season, and in total has 56 career points in 112 NHL games. So not a ton of action for Matt Coronato himself, definitely more than Frank Nazar, of course, but Calgary, of course, felt comfortable enough to give Coronato a 7-year deal, and I think to kind of compare him to Frank Nazar, considering he's a year ahead of Nazar. 47 points in 77 games this year. I feel like that's a pretty fair comparison for Frank Nazar and maybe what the Blackhawks could be expecting from him this year in a full NHL campaign, right? 45, 50 points, somewhere in that ballpark, I think is a reasonable expectation for Nazar, considering he had 26 points in 53 games last year. I think Coronado between the two is the one with the higher goal scoring upside, but I think altogether, Nazar is probably the one who's going to impact the game in more ways. Matt Coronado might have some seasons with more points and probably seasons, many of them with more goals than Frank Nazar, but I do think Frank is the one with the higher upside. And comparing their contracts alongside one another, they're obviously very similar, right? But I think Nazar is probably the one with the better value of the two, again, because of how many ways he's going to impact the game, which Matt Coronado can do as well. But I think Nazar's skating just gives him a little bit of the higher upside in all areas. The next contract that I think is very similar to Frank Nazar's is Juraj Slafkovsky, who is also part of the 2022 NHL draft class, and of course was the first overall selection that year. But Slafkovsky recently signed an 8-year extension with the Montreal Canadiens, carrying a $7.6 million cap hit, which is $1 million more than what Frank Nazar signed for. And Slafkovsky, just like Nazar, is signed now through the summer of 2033 and is still only 21 years old. He's set to turn 22 in March of 2026, and he signed this deal after playing 121 NHL games. So kind of similar in terms of experience and career action to Matt Coronado, definitely more than Frank Nazar's, but he signed this deal after having a 50-point campaign in 2023-24, in which he had 20 goals and 30 assists. This past season might not have necessarily taken the strides the Canadiens wanted to see in terms of overall production, as he only had 51 points, 18 goals, and 33 assists in 79 games, but still a very young man who definitely has right around point per game upside as well. But again, he signed for $1 million more than Frank Nazar is. And as the first overall pick in this draft class, when Nazar was picked 13th, there's really, at this point in time, not a whole lot of separation between the two. Obviously, Slafkovsky is the more proven commodity with back-to-back 50-point campaigns in the NHL, but in terms of where I'm projecting Frank Nazar to get to in these next couple of seasons, given his speed, his strong playmaking ability, I've mentioned, I think he has sneaky good goal-scoring upside as well. 25, I think, is definitely a consistent number that he can find in his career. I think he has point-per-game offensive ceiling, as well as just the overall effort and impact that he makes on the defensive side of things. Could be a staple of the Blackhawks penalty kill moving forward. So, like, Frank Nazar, I fully believe is going to take mammoth strides these next couple of seasons, like I've been outspoken about, which is why I'm so comfortable saying that this is going to turn into a bargain of a contract, because I fully expect him to make these kinds of leaps. And while he's not there yet, it's simply just because he doesn't have a whole lot of NHL action up to this point in time, where Juraj Slafkovsky was thrown into the NHL right away out of the 2022 NHL draft. Slafkovsky for $7.6 million, I think, is still going to be a good deal for the Montreal Canadiens, but Frank Nazar, in all the ways he can impact the game at $6.6 million, yeah, that is going to be a special deal, Blackhawks fans. Another contract that I think is very similar to Nazar's is the one that Dylan Guenther signed in September of last year. 8-year extension with now the Utah Mammoth, of course, carrying a $7.6 million cap hit. $7.14 million cap hit, excuse me. 7.6 was what Juraj Slafkovsky signed for. 8 by 7.14 for Dylan Guenther last September. Little more than $500,000 on top of what Frank Nazar is making. But like Frank Nazar and like Juraj Slafkovsky, he is also signed through the summer of 2033. And Guenther might be the easiest one to compare to Nazar because he signed after just 78 NHL games. However, he had 35 points in 45 games during the 23-24 campaign, 18 goals and 17 assists. And that was not a very good Were they still Arizona at that point in time? Were they already Utah? I don't know. Things just blend together too easily, but wasn't exactly a stacked team at that point in time. So for Gunther to have that type of productivity, much closer to a point per game than what Nazar was in his first kind of full NHL role this season, in top of, him having, well, I guess this was after he signed the contract, but regardless, Gunther went on to follow that up with a 60-point campaign this past season in 70 games, 27 goals, and 33 assists. It's been a very savvy start to his NHL career as the 9th overall pick back in 2021. I think this is a phenomenal deal for the Utah Mammoth. $7.14 million on Dylan Gunther through the summer of 2033. I think Dylan Gunther is going to have the higher offensive upside than Frank Nazar, especially in the goal scoring department. The kid can absolutely rifle the biscuit. This is a phenomenal deal for Utah, and it's just going to get better and better with time, like it is going to with Frank Nazar. I don't think he's going to be racking up probably as many points and score as many goals as Dylan Gunther is. But again, Frank Nazar, with his well-rounded nature, has the ability to impact games in more ways than I think someone like Dylan Gunther does. But make no mistake about it, of the 4 contracts, including Nazar's, that I've broken down so far, I think this 8-year deal for Dylan Gunther at $7.14 million is going to turn out to be a savvy one for the Utah Mammoth. And to sign him on that before he potted 60 points in 70 games this past year, yeah, probably a good chance he winds up at a point per game for the first time in the NHL here this season. Next contract I wanted to bring up in comparison to Frank Nazar's. This player is a little bit older than the last couple of guys I covered. However, I think this player has a lot of similarities. I see a lot of Frank Nazar in his game, and I think the way Frank Nazar is going to impact the game is how this guy does already. It's Seth Jarvis for the Carolina Hurricanes, who signed a 8-year extension with a $7.42 million cap hit in August of 2024. That is going to be an easy money deal for the Carolina Hurricanes. 13th pick, interestingly enough, was Seth Jarvis. Just like Matt Coronado, just like Frank Nazar, he was back in the 2020 NHL draft. Signed after his 3rd full NHL season, where he had 67 points in 81 games, wound up tallying 67 points in 73 games this past season, wound up getting selected to Canada's roster at the Four Nations face-off, even though didn't wind up having the best showing there altogether. This is another deal that is going to age like a fine wine for the Carolina Hurricanes, considering the way that Seth Jarvis can buzz all over the ice and make plays in so many different ways, on top of having point per game upside already for a kid who's still only 23 years old and isn't going to turn 24 until February. I think Frank Nazar is going to do a lot of similar things for the Blackhawks in a couple of years down the road that Seth Jarvis is doing for the Carolina Hurricanes already. Power play, 5-on-5, penalty kill. Outside of being a little bit undersized, which is, again, kind of the, in my opinion, only real knock on Frank Nazar, both of these guys can kind of do it all. Jarvis obviously makes nearly a full $1 million more than Frank Nazar does, and this was back in August of last year, so thought process might have been a little bit different, not truly knowing what the salary cap was going to go up to, but like Dylan Gunther, this is just an outstanding deal, in my opinion, for the Carolina Hurricanes. And again, for Frank Nazar, I believe he's going to be a similar type of guy like Seth Jarvis. For him to be signed for $1 million cheaper at 7 years, again, I think continues to prove why this is such a good bargain here for the Blackhawks. Last contract I wanted to bring up here, Blackhawks fans, that I think kind of compares to Frank Nazar is Matthew Knies, who we saw this summer sign a 6-year deal as a restricted free agent to remain with the Toronto Maple Leafs at $7.75 million, signing him in Toronto through the summer of 2031. And Knies is still only 22 years old himself. He's set to turn 23 in October and was a 2nd-round pick in the 2021 NHL draft. And he signed his deal here this summer after playing in 161 NHL games. His first full season in 23-24 with Toronto, he had 35 points in 80 games and flashed some of his upside. And then this year, he obviously put it all together, tallying 58 points, 29 goals, and 29 assists in 78 games. Was a really solid player for Toronto in the Stanley Cup playoffs as well. I think it's a good deal here for Matthew Knies. I think it's good and fair value. I don't love it as much as Seth Jarvis and Dylan Guenther, but the reason I bring this up is because the 35 points that we saw Nyes tally in, 80 games in 23-24, obviously that was more than 80 games is more than what Frank Nazar played for the Blackhawks this season. But I think the type of leap we saw from Matthew Nyes, he's a much different player than Frank Nazar and does things a lot differently. But to go from 30 points in 80 games to 58 points in 78 games, I think that type of leap is really attainable for someone like Frank Nazar. And the leap we saw Dylan Guenther make from 35 points in 45 games, again, obviously more productive than Frank Nazar was this year, but to go up to 60 and 70 games, these are all guys I've mentioned are more proven commodities and have more NHL experience than Frank Nazar does. But I expect Nazar to make the same types of leaps we've seen these players make in these last couple of years. Matt Coronado goes up to having 47 points, 24 goals, and 23 assists in 77 games this year. Out of all the contracts I broke down, he's the only one who makes less than Frank Nazar does in terms of cap hit, and it's by a fine margin. He makes $6.5 million flat, while Frank Nazar makes $6.59 million. So the point that I really wanted to get across, to conclude segment one here today, Blackhawks fans, is Nazar again at $6.6 million compared to Slafkovsky at 7.6. Guenther at 7.14, Jarvis at 7.42, Nyes at 7.75. I think these, for the most part, are all really good contracts for the club, but they all make more than Frank Nazar does. And while, yes, they're more proven than Frank Nazar is at this point in time, I expect a year or two down the road, Nazar is going to be right in the same conversation as these guys, and he's signed at $6.6 million. So, again, there's still a long ways to go. He's only played 56 games. But I think Frank Nazar is going to be just on the same level, if not higher, than some of these guys in a couple of years down the road. And then it's going to be even more fun to compare some of these contracts with one another and see how Dylan Guenther has gone about his business, Uri Slafkovsky, Seth Jarvis, even though he's a couple of years older, because I think Frank Nazar shows a lot of similarities. I'm really interested to see how these next couple seasons are going to go for my guy, Frank the Tank Nazar, but for multiple different reasons. I really love this extension that Kyle Davidson got him to sign just under a week ago. But there are some NHL contracts that I think give us a little bit of a better understanding of Frank Nazar's value and potential value down the road in the future. Coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, which Blackhawk has the best chance to land a future spot in the NHL Network's top 20 wings list? I'll break that down and give my full reaction on the list here in segment 2. But first, I do got to talk to you all real quick about Game Time. College football is back, and honestly, there's nothing better than the energy of tailgates and being in the stands with your fellow fans. The only downside, it's trying to get tickets. Endless queues, hidden fees, and prices that jump at checkout. But that's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the very best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. And I've truly been using Game Time for probably over a decade up to this point now, and what I personally love is that they offer views from the seats so you know exactly what to expect both before you arrive and also before you make your purchase. So to take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets, go and download the Game Time app, create an account, and then use our promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps for $20 off on your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Before I get into segment 2, I have an important request for all of you listeners and viewers here of the show. Locked On wants to hear from you. We've put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcasts even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't, and answer questions about our advertising. Go to LockedOnPodcast.com/survey to get started today. Everyone who completes a survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's LockedOnPodcast.com FanDuel.com/survey. And you can also find the link to the survey in today's show notes. And just wanted to say thank you again very much for helping us out here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Segment 2 on today's show. The NHL Network, over the last month, has been releasing its annual top 20 list between wings, defensemen, and centers. So I wanted to share my reactions to each of their top 20 lists here on the show over these next couple of days, plus talk about which Blackhawks or future Blackhawks have the best shot of getting on this list in the near future. Starting today with the NHL's top 20 wings that I believe they dropped in the first week of August. But I think this top 20 is honestly between their three lists. This might be their best one overall. I really don't have a ton of gripes with this list, but number one, kicking things off in the top 20 wings in the NHL, both left wings and right wings. Number one is Nikita Kucherov, and there is no gripe from me here. I think Nikita Kucherov might be one of the most underappreciated athletes in all of professional sports. I feel like, he gets his credit, he gets his due, especially when the Tampa Bay Lightning, even though he was playing LTIR games, he was especially getting his credit during those points, but I still don't feel like he's gotten necessarily the superstardom that his game deserves. I mean, Nikita Kucherov is absolutely nasty, and to me is the undoubted number one wing in the entire NHL. Number two on NHL Network's list was David Pastrnak. And I agree. I do think Pasta deserves to be in the number two spot here. 3 consecutive 100-point seasons. I believe 4 straight 40-goal campaigns. He's a shoo-in for 40. He's got some good size. Obviously, there's some things he still has to, check off in terms of the Stanley Cup playoffs, but an all-around game, offensive production, and goal scoring, I think David Pastrnak fully deserves to be number two. At number 3, the NHL Network had Kirill Kaprizov. Just behind him at number 4, they had Mikko Rantanen. At number 5, they had Mitch Marner. I think Kirill Kaprizov is an absolute stud. And obviously, he only played 41 games last year in the NHL, I think, but was on pace for, an MVP caliber type of season. I still don't think you can put him at number 3 over Mikko Rantanen. And I know Rantanen didn't have a great stint in Carolina, but there's a lot that goes into that. And regular season-wise, didn't get off to, like a roaring start with the Dallas Stars. But you know what matters in hockey? The Stanley Cup playoffs, man. And Mikko Rantanen let his you-know-whats hang come Stanley Cup playoff time for the Dallas Stars. And against the Colorado Avalanche in a do-or-die game, I mean, that was absolutely epic. I think it's a little just too disrespectful to Mikko Rantanen to have him at number 4 on this list behind Kirill Kaprizov. So for me personally, I would have Mikko Rantanen at number 3. I'd probably have Mitch Marner at number 4. And I know the narrative around Mitch is that he's soft when it matters the most, doesn't produce when his team needs him to come up clutch. I still think, obviously, what ifs. You can play a whole lot of games with those, but man, if Toronto finishes off the job on the Florida Panthers in that second round series, they really might have won the Stanley Cup. And again, it's a if, but I still just feel like Mitch Marner does not get looked at in the proper light. I was still outspoken about why I didn't think the Blackhawks were in a really strong position to go and make a good run at him this summer. I didn't really expect them to, considering everything what I was hearing. And I know Marner still has another level to get to and to prove himself in the playoffs. But with his two-way play and consistent 90 to 100-point upside, the potential to score 40 goals as well as elite playmaking, and it's not like Kirill Kaprizov is a proven commodity in the Stanley Cup playoffs. So for me personally, I'm going to go Mitch Marner at number 4. I would have Kirill Kaprizov then next, probably at number 5. On NHL Network's list, after they had Marner at 5, they had William Nylander at 6, Matthew Tkachuk at 7, Sam Reinhart at 8, Kyle Connor at 9, and Artemi Panarin at number 10. William Nylander's a baller, and he's done good in the Stanley Cup playoffs compared to some of the other, Toronto Maple Leaf stars, the core 4, if you will. I don't think you can have him over Matthew Tkachuk. back-to-back Stanley Cup champion who has played, such a crucial role and is really the epitome of that Florida Panthers team and is the heartbeat, if you will. Matthew Tkachuk at number 7. You could even make an argument that Tkachuk deserves to be over Mitch Marner, considering what Tkachuk has done in the Stanley Cup playoffs. I'm definitely going to put him over William Nylander. If you want to have him over Mitch Marner, I understand it. I think we're kind of pulling hairs at that point in time, but that's kind of the purpose, I think, of a NHL top 20 list here, right? So I'll go with Matthew Tkachuk at number 6 on my list. I would have William No, I probably, again, Sam Reinhart. I know it's maybe not as great of a body of work in terms of the regular season and year-by-year consistency compared to William Nylander, but for all Sam Reinhart has done and the offense that he provides, goal scoring especially, yeah, he probably should be over William Nylander as well, even though I recognize William Nylander is probably the more skilled player between the two. I'll go Sam Reinhart at number 7. I will go William Nylander at number 8. I'll stick with Kyle Connor at number 9. He and Artemi Panarin at 10, I think, are very close. That is a real tough one. But Panarin's stock has kind of been trending in the wrong direction over the last year and a half, whereas Kyle Connor's stock has been rising. So I guess I'll go with Kyle Connor at number 9. I'll stick with Artemi Panarin at number 10. At number 11 is Jake Gensel. Number 12, Jesper Bratt. Number 13, former Blackhawk Brandon Hagel. And what I will say is I think there is a pretty clear-cut top 13, in my opinion, in terms of the wings. I think after Brandon Hagel or whoever you have at number 13, there's a pretty sizable gap between the rest of these guys. Jake Gensel is a consistent 40-goal scorer, 70-point type of guy. Brandon Hagel is going to impact the game in more ways, though, and had 90 points this season. And I think he's going to be a consistent 70, 80, 90-point guy for the opportunities that he's going to get in Tampa. And gosh, makes so many plays all over the ice. I'd probably stick with Gensel at number 11. I would go Brandon Hagel over Jesper Bratt, though. I'll go Gensel at 11, Hagel at 12, Bratt at 13. Could make an argument for Hagel at 11, though. Don't think he's higher than Artemi Panarin at number 10 just yet at this point in time. But like I said, after 13, I think there is a pretty clear dip in the next slate of wings. NHL Network had Brady Tkachuk at number 14, Clayton Keller at number 15, Jason Robertson, at 16, Alex Ovechkin at 17, Philip Forsberg at 18, Matt Boldy at 19, and then Adrian Kempe at 20. And I think for these final 7 spots, you can really justify it in any different way. It depends on who you ask. Who would I have at 14? I'd probably have Jason Robertson at 14, even though after the 100-point season, now 3 years ago, he's had 80 in back-to-back campaigns. That's still a pretty gosh darn good season. And up until this year in the Stanley Cup playoffs, which he was injured, he had been money in the Stanley Cup playoffs for the Dallas Stars. Brady Tkachuk is an excellent player and impacts the game in so many ways. I think Robertson has the higher offensive ceiling between the two. He has some good size to him as well. He's not as well-rounded as Brady Tkachuk is, but more proven commodity in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Give me Jason Robertson at number 14. I probably would have Brady Tkachuk next at number 15. I would not have Clayton Keller this high up, to me personally. And I know Clayton Keller is a productive offensive player, good on the power play, but a lot of these guys do a little bit more than that, in my opinion. And, he has never been like a dominant number 1 option for that franchise and doesn't really have much Stanley Cup experience to go on it. Ovechkin is one that's really hard to rank because he can just pot 40 whenever he wants to, but obviously is one of the slowest forwards in the league, doesn't provide a ton of value outside of that. But from goal scoring alone, which team scores the most goals still wins games last time I checked, I'd probably go with Ovechkin next at number 16. I'd probably go Matt Boldy next at number 17. Adrian Kempe, I'd probably go next at number 18. Philip Forsberg is an interesting one. He's only had 2 70-point seasons in his entire career, low-key. Him and Clayton Keller are probably the two on this list that I could see taking off. The only real exclusion, though, that I think maybe deserves to be on there, and again, like I said right off the jump, I think this is a really sound list in terms of the 20 guys they got together here. Lucas Raymond is one who stood out to me. Mark Stone, definitely when healthy, you can make a conversation that he's a top 20 wing in the NHL. He's not right now. I'd probably go with him over Philip Forsberg. Lucas Raymond, though, is obviously the healthy one. I'd probably take Lucas Raymond over Clayton Keller, to me personally. Yeah, give me Philip Forsberg at 19. Give me Lucas Raymond at 20. Clayton Keller is probably the one forward who I'd have in this NHL Network top 20 list that I have dropping out. But as far as which Blackhawk has the potential to crack this top 20 wings list next, well, obviously their current wings are Ryan Donato, Teuvo Teravainen, Tyler Bertuzzi, Ilya Mikheyev, Nick Foligno. Yeah, probably a fat chance that any of those guys are going to wind up in an NHL Network top 20 list here anytime soon. So it's probably going to be one of the Blackhawks youngsters. And the complications with determining who it could be next is we don't know which one of these are necessarily going to be wings. Like, is Frank Nazar going to turn into a wing? How about Anton Frondel? Does Oliver Moore wind up playing wing? Does Sasha Boisvert wind up playing wing, right? Like, there's only so many center positions you can have in the lineup, right? 4 of them, and the Blackhawks have a lot of center icemen in their prospect pool, which definitely isn't a bad thing to have, but it's going to be interesting to see which one of these guys wind up firmly solidifying themselves as a full-time center. As far as true wings go, this is kind of where there's still a little bit of a weakness in the Blackhawks prospect pool, but not necessarily a true weakness because, again, some of these guys who are listed as centers are going to be playing as wings long-term. Nick Lardis is a true wing. Marek Vanacker is a true wing. Roman Kanserov is a true wing. Out of those 3, which ones do I think, which one has the best chance to get into a top 20 list next? You know, well, he's not one of those 3. I guess Nick Lardis, just because of his goal scoring, and if he does wind up hitting and figuring it out in the NHL, he really could be a stud. But as far as all of the Blackhawks in total, I'd probably go with Frank Nazar. Even though I do think he has a decent shot to be a center iceman, there is a really good possibility that he gets moved to the wing as well, considering Anton Frondel's a little bit bigger. Sasha Boisvert's a little bit bigger. Nazar has the speed advantage over both of those guys, but he can still make an impact in lots of different ways on the wing as well. That's going to be a fascinating conversation. I'll take a guess and say Frank Nazar winds up being the next Blackhawk in the NHL Network's top 20 wings list, but it's really hard to tell because things are still so murky in terms of the future of this Blackhawks forward group and set positionings on each of these prospects. But there is my reaction to the NHL Network's top 20 wings list. I'll be going through the top 20 centers and defensemen here on the show in these next couple of days. Coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, before I wrap things up, still got to get into a brief update on the Connor Bedard extension situation. Just realized I had the survey promo overlay, tongue twister, I guess, set up for the entirety of segment 2. Apologies for that to anyone who's been watching on the YouTube side of things. Segment 3, before closing things out with Frank Nazar inking his new deal here in Chicago. Naturally, many Blackhawks fans have been wondering if Connor Bedard is going to do the same thing here this summer. I've already been pretty outspoken of my opinion on this matter, and I've covered a couple of small updates in the last couple of weeks, mainly from Frank Saravalli. We got another one recently on his show to bring up, and well, again, it's not much of an actual update here. I still think it's worth mentioning on the show just to kind of let us know where the Blackhawks and Bedard appear to be at in this process. The latest quote we have from Frank Saravalli being, quote, "I think both sides seem pretty content and sitting back and waiting to see how this third year plays out," close quote. So Not much of an update, but again, no real surprise to me. And from what I've been saying on the show these last couple of weeks, just doesn't really make a lot of sense for Bedard's camp to sign an extension right now when there's just so much at stake and so much in store in his third NHL season. Still a lot to learn about Connor Bedard as he's a fresh 20-year-old kid, and the Blackhawks are still figuring out a lot of things about their team as a whole. So again, for many different reasons, fully expect this to be something that winds up getting done next summer. And to anyone who's saying, oh, Bedard's not going to sign an extension, he's going to Vancouver, you don't know what the heck you're talking about. No reason to be worried about that happening at all. But I do think it is still going to be a bridge deal for Bedard on his next contract. Just doesn't really make sense for a kid of his upside and with how many strides he still can make in his game, with how many leaps he can make with all the upside in the world. Tying him down to a 6 or 7 year deal when he is 20, 21 years old just doesn't make a lot of sense. So I'm expecting a 3 to 5 year bridge deal fully on Bedard's next contract. And in terms of what he could possibly command, that's going to be heavily impacted by how this season goes. But that's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks, everyone. Just wanted to say thank you for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen here to start off your day. For your second listen, make sure to go and check out the Locked On NHL podcast, where there is no offseason, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter the most with the local coverage you love from Locked On. And you can easily find Locked On NHL right now wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Follow Locked On Blackhawks for free as well, if you haven't done so already, wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. That way you don't miss out on any of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. Until the next episode, everyone, enjoy the rest of your days. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.